Okay, I am recording this at like 2 a.m. because I am a big dumb. So apparently, this game, Signs of the Sojourner, had a huge update right when I was making this video. So I somehow didn't realize this, and I just played my old version for Mitch without realizing there was new content. So this video is slightly outdated somehow. So, yeah, I don't know how that happened. It just did. But hey, there's content in in the game that's not in this video. So if you want to see it, go play the game. Okay, anyway, on with our regularly scheduled broadcast of my complete and utter stupidity. Indie games have it rough. Despite usually being a beacon of originality, passion, and quality compared to most AAA games, they have it real tough in terms of getting themselves out there. These are small teams, often without the extra budget to advertise their game widely. Word of mouth and the odd Steam recommendation is what most can hope for. This leaves us with a market where, while a lot of good games can float up to the surface with good word of mouth, some are just forgotten in the shuffle. Games with so much love and passion poured into them, excellently crafted experiences just don't get noticed. I always hate to see games end up with this fate, where it's really something special, but it ends up completely unrecognized even by small reviewers. I have a few personal favorites that ended up with less recognition than they deserve, such as Smile for Me, No Delivery, or Vision Soft Reset. But the crowning jewel of underrated games is the focus of today. That being a small deck building game called Signs of the Sojourner. Signs of the Sojourner is a game made by Echo Dog Studios and published by them as their first title, although they did get help for the music from Skew Sound. The game was released in May of 2020 and has recently come to consoles with the help of the publisher Digerati. The game itself is a deck building game with an interesting concept. The game follows you, an unnamed main character who must take her mother's job of running her store by traveling around a dying world in order to collect items and perhaps figure out more about who she was. This is where the deck building comes in, as this game has a unique way of handling the concept of conversation. In order to collect items or get information, you have to talk to various characters throughout the world. Doing this involves a card game where you have to use many cards with different symbols and must work collaboratively with the other person to match the card symbols and have a successful conversation. The game is very open-ended and allows for a lot of choice in who you talk to, where you go, and how things will end up based on your ability. Your playthrough can be vastly different from someone else's because of the level of choice. If you're anything like I am, this may sound like a really interesting, fun, and captivating experience of a game. Too bad no one has heard of it though. There wasn't much talk about this game around when it came out, though I can understand it a bit more since it was in the middle of 2020 and... yeah. But I only found the game by chance, really. I got it from that huge 1000 game bundle itch.io made for charity during the absolute hell of 2020. It was among several games that people had said good things about and wanted me to play, so not the best start there either. But it managed to stand out with an interesting style, a description that hooked me, and the benefit of me being a total sucker for games based around diplomacy. But my goodness, this game was so much more than I was ever expecting. It's a game that just sucked me in and always does whenever I pick it up. It's a captivating experience that I feel really needs to be experienced by more people. So, I'm here today to get on my soapbox and explain why this game deserves more love, and for you to try it if you haven't. So let's buckle up and hit the open road. Here's why Signs of the Sojourner is an underrated gem of a game. Signs of the Sojourner crafts a really fun gameplay loop that allows for so much player freedom, but it's also one of the most intense game experiences I've had in its own way. The basic gameplay of Signs of the Sojourner involves you traveling out to find items for your store, with or possibly without the trading caravan. You go between several different locations to pick up items or learn information in order to do this. This is where the conversation aspect of the game comes in. I have a love-hate relationship with diplomacy in games. On one hand, I love the concept of it, talking your way out of situations by engaging with the characters, the world, and story, and having a unique way to play through the game without combat. But on the other hand, many times diplomacy or speech mechanics in games feel either not fleshed out or just shallow like modern Fallout, where it's basically a button to skip combat, without anything interesting filling the void. But there are games that manage to pull off diplomacy in interesting and unique ways, and Signs of the Sojourner manages to do that by capturing the feeling of a conversation. The game is a deck building card game, but instead of using those cards to fight with diplomacy like in Griftlands for example, you use them collaboratively. Each card has two sides with symbols on them. In order to have a successful conversation, you simply need to match symbols to reach the end of the board. Do it enough times and you'll have a nice chat and maybe get something, information or an item to sell back home. But mismatch too many times and you'll walk away with nothing. This is a very simple system at first, but it grows much more complex and difficult as you throw in more and more symbols, add in special cards with abilities, and not to even mention the accord system, where matching the same symbol enough times can let you screw up for free and save your skin and allow for risky plays. It ends up being really fun and plays into another aspect of the game, the player freedom. You get to go out on the road 5 times in a playthrough for 50 days at a time. Although the first is more of a tutorial and keeps a lot of the map from you. But on these trips you can go wherever you like and talk to whoever you want. There is the caravan I mentioned before that goes on its own route, that leads you back home eventually, but you don't have to follow them at all, and some characters suggest you find your own routes. So, for 4 of those trips, you have total and complete freedom to go where you like, as long as you can talk good enough to get the directions and see what stories you want to. This plays into what I mentioned about it being harder as more symbols get introduced. Each character in town will have their own set of symbols they talk with, and your deck is small with just 20 cards. So the game hits you with having to choose what symbols to sort of spec into. The game hammers in that you cannot please everyone, and keeping your deck diverse with every single symbol may work sometimes if you can snag some good multi-symbol cards. But it can cause a lot of pain for some conversation if you don't plan ahead. But if you do want to be a people pleaser, the game can allow for that too, although with more difficulty, as the deck building works so that after a conversation with someone, successful or not, you pick up a card from their deck. So as you go along your route, you can try to slowly fit in and pull out a few successful talks. Or you can spec into a few towns and see their stories. Or you can try to build up the ultimate multi-symbol deck so you can go everywhere by the end. The game allows for so much freedom in its gameplay, and we haven't even mentioned that failing conversation is just part of the experience. There is no restart button, so if you fail one, you live with it, and that will have effects on how the story goes. But we'll discuss that more in depth later. Now, if you're like me, this may sound like a very chill and lovely deck, but wrong! This game is one of the most stressful experiences I have ever had. But in a good way. Let me explain. The game does not screw around with difficulty, and this plays into the whole atmosphere and tone of the game, showing how stressful your life and struggles on the road will be. This is seen with the multiple symbols. Those can easily screw you over if you need to get something in a very important conversation, but they only have some symbols you do, and it becomes a stressful endeavor to constantly build a chord so you can make mismatches and hope to God you pull the symbols you do share. RNG can and will try to screw you over, but a clever player will get through, but man is it difficult. And that's not even mentioning the most hellish thing in this game. The fatigue cards. Fatigue cards will start to slowly fill your deck as you spend days out on the road. These cards cannot match with anything, and playing one without a card will result in 2 failed bubbles. sometimes instantly ruining a conversation. And they will slowly build along your journey till you may be fighting just to get any actual symbol cards to show up near the final part of the trip. Once again, this plays into the atmosphere as after a long time on the road, you just get tired, and through these cards, so much more stress, and it makes everything harder. There are ways to get rid of these cards, such as spending time with your dog or random encounters on the road, but most of the time, they will stick until you go back home at the end of the trip. This makes the end of a trip the most stressful thing ever, as you may be desperately trying to have important conversations to reach certain storylines, but these cards make it a living hell, and you may just have to watch as you lose things and miss out on storylines until your next playthrough. But once again, the stress is honestly invigorating. It's the same stress as a truly difficult and harrowing experience. It just makes the success all the more sweet, and the relief when you finally finish a trip and see how much you got in spoils is so great. The gameplay loop is just so fun with this game, and it managed to constantly keep me going for hours at a time easily, with my mind saying just one more conversation, just one more. It's so much fun and intertwines with the story so well, as your conversations will affect everything around you. But we'll get to that when we discuss the story. But how about we talk about the music and atmosphere, because it has that in spades. Signs of the Sojourner has a feel that no other game has truly replicated. The game builds up this really fascinating world that has been hit hard by climate change, and now leaves society as we see it, running at a much more basic level with only smaller towns littering the world. Some of these areas are a bit bleak, with people just barely scraping by and being hit hard by the damage to their world. The game doesn't shy away from these harsh realities of how messed up this world is, but it doesn't overly focus on it. It keeps a much more hopeful and optimistic tone. Despite the state of the world in these towns, the people in the game itself mostly keep with hopeful optimism. They never stew in how awful things are getting, well, mostly, instead focusing on how to improve things around them, and just keeping their spirits up no matter what. The game really does manage to pull this bittersweet, optimistic tone that shows that no matter how bad it might be, the human spirit will come through and try to make it better. And we haven't even touched the world itself, because my goodness, the locales in this game are so varied and different. From the peaceful Bartow with close friends, to the quaint but joyful Buckenborough, which slowly turns from ghost town to thriving as you play, to the noisy streets of Anko, which feels like a remnant of old cities, and so many others. Every single town in this game feels so different and unique, and this can be credited to not just the world design, but also the art and music of this game. The art of this game is just so nice. The soft and surreal colors mixed with the sketchy, wobbly lines just makes for an art style unlike any other I've seen. I genuinely don't know how to describe how lovely it is. Just look at this art! God, I love indie art styles. And all of this is complemented by an incredible score by Sound, aka Steve Pardo, which had so much love put in it, as they would only have it performed with actual instruments along with a few found sounds. The level of love is just felt in the focused, jazzy, synthetic music that is unlike any other OST I have heard. Each song is unique from the last, while still holding that same tone and feel of the game. Each track fits their location perfectly and sets the mood for any scenes there. The game builds this feeling of adventure on the open road, of finding hope even in the darkest of times, and of just making friends out there. It's hard to describe the atmosphere, so it's a lot more than I can really describe here. All of this helps suck the player into the story, world, and character of this game. So let's talk about that. Signs of the Sojourner is all about its plot and characters. Everything you do is to see more of this world, these characters, and to guide your own story. The basic premise, as I said before, is that your mother has just passed away. She ran a small store in your town by going out with a caravan to gather things. This shop helped your town thrive, and now that she passed, you have to take it over and go out on the road, possibly to figure out your mom's more mysterious past. Your actions and how well you do will determine the fate of your town and where you end up. This is a very simple premise, but it does allow for both an easy excuse to see all these locales and various characters, and to allow for a lot of player freedom in guiding your story. Like I said before, you can go anywhere you like and do anything. The game will almost never force your hand. You can choose to go with the caravan, or you can do what you like. You can decide what towns to go to and how to affect the story going on there. A lot of what you can do will affect these people and allow for you to play a part in their stories. Some may be easier to get than others, but you can go for anything you want. Whether it's something to learn about your mom, or it's just as simple as helping one town thrive. There are so many stories to get involved in and see their conclusions. I can't even pretend that I know all the plot lines and ways this game can end. It just either is, or at least is very good at pretending to be that open. It's a special kind of choice-based game where there's so many little effects you can have upon the world that your playthrough really will feel like your very own, something you crafted yourself. And speaking of multiple endings, the game does something really nice by randomizing the people you run into first in these towns, and therefore how you get involved in these stories. I am someone who is often bored replaying story-based games, simply because I have seen it before, and thus it's a bit hard for me to go back for endings if I have to replay the entire thing. But Signs of the Sojourner makes replaying for these endings a new experience through this, instead of something you have to slog through as it's the same as last time. And I haven't even begun to talk about those characters. Signs of the Sojourner may not have the deepest characters, but my goodness does it have some fun ones. Each area has plenty of fun characters for you to meet with their own quirks, personalities, and goals. From your best friend Elias, who is a lovable dork who always does their part to help, and whose relationship with you sits at the very center of the game, to more lovable small characters such as the struggling android XN220, who is just too wholesome, and the upbeat macho woman Matilde, who is also too wholesome, and my personal favorite with Basilio brothers, who sit at the center of the Anka plotline, someone trying to turn over a new leaf for their city, and their brother falling in their old footsteps and causing harm. This is only the tiniest fraction of the game's all-star supporting cast. No character feels bland once you get to their story. No character is wasted. Everything is enjoyable or moves forward with certain plot lines. Not to mention how characters all interlink with their relationships and who they know, which just makes the world just that much more alive and lived in. I wish I could talk more in depth with all these plot lines that I've experienced, but I really don't want to spoil any of them, because part of the magic is just stumbling upon these plot lines when you can, and then just choosing which to see to those ends. But just know that these plot lines, whether they connect to your mother or not, will have some great endings to them. But this game just ties together its pieces into a whole so much greater. From the atmosphere making the story and characters hit so much harder, from the gameplay really complementing the tone and pulling the player in with those feelings of stress and wanting to learn about these characters, to the gameplay being so open to allow for the player to discover their own story. Every single bit of this game comes together to make what ended up as a magical experience that I wasn't expecting. But let's wrap all this up now. I went into Signs of the Sojourner not really expecting too much. Maybe just a neat little experience and nothing more. But my goodness, I ended up with one of my absolute favorite games. Between the amazing music and art, to the personalized story of these interesting characters, and the deceptively simple yet intense gameplay, there's so much to love about Signs of the Sojourner. Seriously, if this game seems interesting to you, give it a try. The game has a demo on Steam if you want to give it a shot. The demo covers the first trip to let you get a feel for the gameplay and characters, and the game itself isn't too expensive for the content it has, sitting at a reasonable $20. That goes cheaper as it usually is on sale when those come around. You can pick it up on consoles, Steam, or even itch.io. This game is way too underrated for how incredible it is. This seriously is one of my favorite indie games of 2020, and that is some competition, so that means a lot to say. It just is that special. I would love to see people talking more about this game and other hidden gems like it. Hopefully I've at least convinced one person to try it. That's all for this review. See y'all wherever the next one takes us.